Welcome to the Eye on Innovation podcast brought to you by OIS. I'm your host, Carrie Powers. I have the incredible opportunity to speak with really smart people, which is so fun, love this job. And today is no exception. My first guest today is Dr. David Roux, the Global Chief Medical Officer for Microsoft. Dr. Roux delivered the keynote lecture yesterday at Digital Day, the very first ASCRS Digital Day. And we're here to find out what the big highlights were from Digital Day. We also have with us Dr. Rania Habash, an ophthalmologist from Bascom Palmer, co-founder of MetaMed, and also on the board for the Digital Ophthalmic Society, which sponsored Digital Day. And I honestly could go on and on and on about all the things Dr. Habash is involved with. So first, a big welcome to Eye on Innovation podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Carrie. This is really exciting. Thanks.
Join Doctors Maria Barakal, Praveen Dugal, and Firas Rahal at the upcoming OIS Retina on July 27th in Seattle, where you'll see and meet with leading startup companies, top industry executives, and clinical thought leaders addressing unmet retina needs through novel therapies. Save 30% when you register for both OIS Retina and OIS 13, the original Ophthalmology Innovation Summit, taking place this December 1st and 2nd in San Diego. Register today at OIS.net.
Full disclosure, Dr. Habash and I are really good friends.
Yes.
So to pick up on that during the really excited for this conversation. So today we really want to dig into how digital innovation is advancing healthcare. And of course, there's nobody more qualified to speak on that subject than my two guests here today. So I know the topics yesterday were really wide-ranging, everything from AI to precision medicine, surgical guidance, and beyond. So Dr. Habash, my first question is for you. I want to know, leaving that session and bumping into your colleagues afterward, what were the three innovations that they were most excited about?
I don't know that I can pick just three, to be honest, but yesterday's talk or yesterday's session was just so outside the box from what we always hear about. I mean, it was actually really heartwarming and inspiring that all these people are doing so many, just innovative things. And, it's not just another dry eye meeting or another, blepharitis meeting or any of the typical stuff that we normally see. Mm-hmm. So we saw some technologies in the metaverse, we saw augmented reality, we saw real use cases for ChatGPT and some of these other, things when in most meetings, we're still talking about, will AI replace doctors? So mm-hmm. That's why it was so inspiring just to see the range of things that people are working on and all the innovations out there. It was honestly just the best meeting I think I've ever seen.
What were the concerns raised, if any?
We try to debate a lot of things like, the ethics and control around mm-hmm. things like AI and how far that can go. Mm-hmm. We talked about a lot of the health equity initiatives. One of the things that came up that kept coming up actually was, does everyone need to have a VR device if they're going to do something in augmented reality or in metaverse? And they don't, actually, and that was a really important point to make.
Mm-hmm. Oh, phenomenal. Yeah. Dr. Roux, what did you think was most exciting in terms of the innovations? You mentioned when you walked in today, there were things that were even new to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It was a real joy to join colleagues to discuss digital health and to talk about areas where technology can help. I oftentimes find that the conversation tends to move towards some of the really cutting edge things like artificial intelligence and some of the amazing work that people are doing to use telemedicine and telehealth in ways that we know are important but haven't necessarily been tested.
Yeah.
We saw and heard a lot about use of augmented reality and virtual reality, and as Rania was sharing, I think some of the key messages were that we don't have to necessarily utilize these headsets as the primary way to engage. In fact, there was just prior to the ASCRS meeting, the very first ever metaverse experience, live surgery being broadcast where people could join, and people were joining on their computers. They were joining on their laptops and their phones, tablets. So you don't necessarily have to have these devices to be able to experience these immersive and interactive technologies. And I think as we think about the democratization of these technologies, whether it be AR, VR, AI, and other areas, it's going to change the way that we think about how we take care of patients and who we take care of.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned that, the VR headset, because I think that is a huge barrier in people's minds, right? I know for me, I just got my very first VR headset a few months ago, and I'm still struggling with what to do when I have it on. I'm still struggling. So it's really great to hear that everyone can participate in this sort of virtual reality environment.
Well, yeah, David, thank you for saying that, actually. So that was MetaMed. We had the first ever metaverse surgery live streamed in 3D into the metaverse.
That's incredible.
The first ever. And it was really a groundbreaking, historic event. And David and I were sitting beside each other in avatar form, whispering back and forth. I remember you leaned over in your avatar form and whispered.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, is this the first ever really?
That is incredible.
This is
Congratulations. That is historic.
It is, but it's exactly what you said. We had people joining and watching these things and techniques and sharing, these surgical techniques and pearls from all over the world, and they don't all need to have a VR headset. So David was on his computer.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really exciting is if you think about how these technologies can be used to share very complicated cases or things that people traditionally don't have as much expertise in, but now leveraging the power of the crowd. So you have an ability to elevate your game, be able to perform at a level with greater confidence, to be able to do things that you couldn't have envisioned before. And that translates to better patient care for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I've never heard that term before, the crowd. How'd you say it?
There was a book called Wisdom of the Crowds.
Oh, okay, got it.
That highlighted the fact that sometimes the crowd, the people around you know more than just the single experts.
Of course,
and
of course.
Oftentimes we find that we don't leverage the individuals that are around us. And it largely because it's not convenient. It's difficult. It's something that would require a lot of effort, and sometimes it's not just a conversation. You actually need to see the image or interact with it. And now with AR, VR, we have an ability to use images and recreate three-dimensional structures so that people can collaborate with that same image and allow them to be able to provide their own suggestions.
That's amazing. What it's making me think of is just the benefit to people all over the world who are in communities that don't have access to surgeons. Mm-hmm. The training that you can provide to these physicians that are out, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. That's phenomenal. How exciting this is.
Yeah, we usually have to fly out to help people in other places and share our surgical techniques. Of course, that's time, that's money, that's effort, and then you're only teaching a handful of people, but this revolutionizes everything. And I think it was actually interesting what you said. You and I were on a call a couple of weeks ago, remember? And you had your HoloLens on. And he goes, do you want to see what I'm seeing through my screen? And that was a really important point, because all it takes is one person to have the headset on, and then it broadcasts to everyone else who's watching. It was actually crazy, even for me. I started to see everything he was seeing in augmented reality. So he was showing me pictures of the body and manipulating those images in 3D real time, just because one person had a HoloLens on.
Yeah, this democratizes education, training, patient care for so many people. And the example that Rania was describing is we were all in a Microsoft Teams meeting. So, traditional, just discussing about what we were actually preparing for this event. And I was sharing that, boy, wouldn't it be great if we also could demo some of this live? And they're like, oh, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, let me hold on one second. I grabbed the HoloLens, and because HoloLens is directly connected into the Teams environment, I was able to show basically images, anatomy images of molecules, and they were live 3D right in front of me. But everyone that was not using a HoloLens was able to actually see all the things that I was doing and in a three-dimensional manner. So it was a really exciting opportunity for people to jump into the metaverse even though they're not wearing a headset.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. So I think, me being not that sophisticated in terms of technology, but I'm learning, I'm coming along thanks to Dr. Habash. So I think we're all starting to comprehend that with this digitization of health, and just even one example is taking all this unstructured data formats like video and imagery, synthesizing it in a way that's actionable for a healthcare provider. And so I think the big question on everyone's mind is, if we're there already with the technology, what are the barriers that are holding us back from your everyday provider out there in the field from benefiting from this technology?
Yeah, well, one of the first things would be it has to be workflow compatible. If you're asking somebody to do something that is extra work, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day that you have to spend with your patients, and you're adding that on top of that, finding which device and having it set up, it's very difficult. So it has to be workflow compatible. Now, the other thing is if it can save you time, it is very likely to be something that you will go to as a first line. So we, just a few weeks ago, we had this conference called HIMSS, where we made some announcements with some of our partners around the use of technologies that will save doctors time. So for instance, a doctor and a patient are having a conversation. That entire conversation can be captured, and when you're done with that conversation, there's a note. It's been basically reorganized into the same format that you're familiar with. You can take a look at it, you can modify it, and then you can push a button, and then it plops into your medical record. That saves clinicians a tremendous amount of time in terms of documenting into the EHR. Another example is we've been working with Epic and one of the larger EHRs. And when you're done with these encounters, you get a lot of emails from your patients. What will happen is the AI will review them, triage it to the appropriate areas. So for instance, if it's a medication refill, it goes to the pharmacist. If it's an appointment, it goes to the scheduler. And then it'll draft a proposed email so that you could take a look at it and you would say, this looks good, I'll maybe tweak a few here, and I'll push the button. And that saves the clinician, again, a tremendous amount of time in terms of responding back to those emails. So it's an incredible opportunity. And when we think about imaging, we have an opportunity to apply AI on top of a tremendous number of images. Think about all the screenings that occur and that are digitized. And imagine now if we can organize it so that the abnormals are presented to the top of your inbox, and then the normals are below. It's a huge efficiency gain. And as if you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, and if somebody has kind of put all the corner pieces onto one side and all the edge pieces here and all the middle ones and all the sky blues, it gives you such efficiency in terms of being able to do your work. So many great use cases in terms of how we can make lives better for clinicians, but it all is about workflow compatibility and saving time.
I think that's a really important area of education for us, right? So, because right now I can imagine with everything on their plate, physicians don't have time to even keep up with how this could be saving them time. And so how do we create some sort of curriculum to help them along in knowing how to incorporate some of this into their workflow?
Yeah, exactly. David, you gave some great answers there. I mean, he's exactly right. It's all about just starting to use the technology. And I think with the generative AI capabilities that we have now, we're actually creating content rather than just analyzing old content, right? And so when you can have natural language processing, when you're talking to a patient, for instance, and then you get a note at the end of it, rather than having to sit down and slave over notes at the end of the day, I mean, that is a tremendous savings. It's one of those things, you just have to kind of jump in and try it, and then and it's funny what you said, actually, because we're so busy that we can't even find ways to make ourselves less busy.
Yeah, I mean, I actually found that happening with me this week because, everyone's talking about ChatGPT. And so I've been, dabbling a little bit, but it's like I haven't even found the time to understand how to best use it and how to do the prompts. So I think you're right. I think you just kind of have to dig in and start doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's all advancing so rapidly anyway. So.
One thing I would recommend as some of the listeners may be thinking about some of these newer technologies and how to incorporate it into their own practice is to think about doing it in a way that's safe, secure, as well as one that will create great value. And oftentimes if you go to the internet, you can play around and test with the different models. But if you're looking to apply it in patient care or in in healthcare, I should say, then the best way is to actually have it within your own tenant, within your own environment, where you can bring the model to your own data sets. You can select which data sets you want it to look at first, and that gives you greater control over the outputs. And it allows you to be able to test and refine to make sure that what you're developing is something that you feel very comfortable with. Because there is always the chance that it's going to, what we sometimes refer to as hallucinate. It'll come up with these unusual creative ideas that aren't founded on facts or things. So we can test that. We can do the QA on top of it. We can ensure that there's references on top of it. There's a lot of different strategies. But once you've done that, you have an ability to then be able to deploy this within a specific setting. And I would say within healthcare, let's start with the high impact, low risk areas. All the things that are in the back office, the administrative components, writing notes, summarizing things such that you will, at the end, review it. So always put the human or the clinician in the loop and then make it easier for that person to be able to do their job.
So am I correct? Is what you're referring to the federated data model? Is that what that is?
It could be through federation, but I'm just simply referencing the fact that as organizations try to experiment with generative AI, it's important that they do it in, so I'll call it the enterprise version. So bringing that to your own cloud instance as opposed to using the internet, which is publicly available.
Okay, that
and we've
makes so
seen,
much sense.
Yeah, a lot of organizations get burned because their employees were so eager to do this that they started putting information, confidential information into the, under the web.
Yes.
And there is a better, safer way to do that.
That makes so much sense. Yeah.
You're totally right, though. I mean, it is very similar to federated learning. You bring the analytics to where you are, to the endpoint where you are. Yeah.
So, Dr. Habash, do you think, is there anything unique about ophthalmology that makes it a particularly beneficial with all of the digitization of health data?
Oh yeah, I do think so. I mean, I'm sort of partial, but I mean, we love our gadgets, we love our lasers, we love our devices, and I think what's important is that in order to offer the best patient care, you have to kind of stay on top of these trends, and you have to offer, the newest technology, the best technology, and otherwise, you're not doing your patients, the right service. And so we do tend to adopt things a lot faster at a more innovative, rapid rate because it's all about patient care. And the margin of error for us is really, really small. So, all of these incremental improvements make a huge difference in our patients' lives. So I do think ophthalmology is special in that way. Plus, we're also just such a tight-knit community, learning from each other all the time. I really don't see that in other areas of medicine. I work a lot with other areas of medicine, as does David, of course, but ophthalmology is very unique. It's special.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my experience in ASCRS has been that there's so much great innovation coming out within the area of ophthalmology. I was really impressed with some of the AI work that's being done to digitize images, to apply it in ways that will democratize the care for everyone.
That's fantastic. So I definitely want to broach on the topic of health equity. I mean, that's the most important issue that we're working on, that the digitization of health data can help. So would you explain to the listeners how those two concepts are related?
Yeah, so if we think about just the general concept of health equity, every individual having the right to be able to achieve their best health and trying to find ways that we as an organization, as a society, can help enable them. A lot of these factors are beyond the things that a physician can control, but we need to start thinking about programs where we can provide access to care, at high quality care, affordable care to every individual across the board. And if we think, let's just take a step back from some of the challenges that ophthalmologists face today. When a person comes to see them in a visit, there's a large number of individuals who will not have had the opportunity to have seen them.
Yep.
So let's take a look at diabetic retinopathy, one of the biggest challenges. Diabetes going rampant globally, a number of patients with diabetic retinopathy certainly increasing, all the other complications from diabetes as well. And a small fraction of those individuals are actually seen and then continue to get the treatments. So what we have to look at is how do we find a way that every individual across the globe can get those proper screenings. And it means that we need to rethink our approach for where they get the care and how they get the care. So they don't necessarily have to be in your clinic to be able to do this. We now are starting to see technologies that can be applied anywhere. It could be in the home on a mobile device. It could be in a retail clinic on a device that's rather portable. And that gives us a chance to be able to acquire these high quality images. From there, we might be able to apply artificial intelligence on top of that so that we can read and understand and do some initial screenings. But then at the same time, it was digitized and sent to a clinician to review that. Yep. So we can double check and ensure that these are the things that what the AI said was correct. And then from the clinician's perspective, there could be a telemedicine visit. And from there, that could then lead to the person coming in for a procedure. And then that information, because it's digitized, can be brought to the electronic health record. So throughout that entire process, there's this digitization process. There's an ability for us to expand care in different areas and allows us to be able to, again, democratize it for everybody.
I'd love to actually continue on that. So what David is saying, it's not abstract thinking. This has happened. At Bascom, I implemented a program, it was like 3 or 4 years ago, even before the pandemic, where we put cameras out in primary care offices. And this is in downtown Miami, but as you said, diabetics need to be screened every year with an eye exam. But our screening rate, the screening rate in the population, downtown Miami, was 40%. When we put the cameras there, the screening rate went up to 82%.
Wow.
Unbelievable,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
incredible.
just those metrics, those numbers are unbelievable. So it gives a lot of grounding to what you're saying. I mean, this system works. And then along the board, what happened then is these patients were then expedited, the ones who had actionable disease. We actually found 50% pathology within that population. That's 50% of people who wouldn't have known they had something wrong with their eyes, could have feasibly gone blind. But we were able to catch those patients and then expedite their treatments to the retina specialists who needed to see them. The retina specialists were happy because they weren't just getting normal exams through the door anymore. They were getting actionable patients who they could actually help. And then, of course, the whole population. I mean, it revolutionized everything in the population. The other example I'll give is, I'm a huge telemedicine advocate. As you know, growing up in rural West Virginia, that's where, that was a place where you just, people may not have a car, but they had a smartphone. And so they were able to get access to care, access to tertiary level care by specialists at Bascom Palmer and Mass Eye and Ear and all of these other places just because they had a smartphone. And I can't tell you, the number of times we heard mothers crying on the phone saying, I never would have been able to afford coming to Miami to see one of these subspecialists. We had patients from all over the world, honestly, doing visits via telehealth. And they would tell us, it was heartbreaking. They would say, I would have had to sell my car or my home in order to fly to Miami to get a visit for my child. And I would have done it because my child needed that kind of tertiary level care. But instead, we were able to offer that just through a smartphone. There's nothing in the world that gives you more gratification than that.
That is incredible. That must just feel so rewarding.
Yeah,
just
it
the
was.
greater impact that you're able to have on patients.
Yeah.
I would imagine that this would have a profound impact on clinical trials and making medicines safer for a more diverse population. Can you speak to that a little bit?
But yeah, it's not just safer. It's more accessible. We, a lot of the people who come to Bascom, they come literally just to find out if they can qualify for a trial. And they do, fly there and they take time off work and they have childcare, whatever, but a lot of the questions are, do I qualify for a clinical trial? Well, guess what? We could have told them that from anywhere they were, right? And so the digitization of medicine and some of the tools that Microsoft has actually for clinical trials matching will just do a search for all the data sets and parameters that they want. You want a 45-year-old woman with, early glaucoma with this type of genetic profile. You can choose her from, the searches that you do, and then invite them to participate in these trials rather than the patient having to find you.
Yeah, the clinical trials matching can be used by either the patient and or by the clinical trials group. So for instance, if you are the patient and you've just been recently diagnosed with a certain condition, you could use a chatbot, and we're doing this already with several organizations where they basically ask you a series of questions. You just simply respond. And what it does is it searches all the databases, it identifies the inclusion-exclusion criteria and tells you these are the trials that you're eligible for.
Wow,
and similarly, you could, if you're the, let's say the organization that has all these great clinical trials and you want to match those trials to the people, you can do a database to database analysis. And what it does is it not only finds the individual, but what it'll do is it'll look at all the inclusion exclusion criteria and do that matching, and then come up with each trial the list of individuals who are potentially eligible.
Wow. We truly are in the middle of a transformation right now. This is very, very exciting.
Oh, it's funny you said that, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, people do this on Match.com all the time.
Set your
have their
filters.
criteria. Yeah, you have your filters and you find your matches. Why not do that with clinical trials matching too?
That's amazing.
It's not that extreme or crazy.
Well, this is incredible. This has just been such a fun conversation. I learned so much. My last question today, I want to know, in your personal life, what have you figured out is a really great use for ChatGPT or one of the other AI programs? Are you using it personally at all?
So a lot of times my kids have a lot of questions and I don't really know the answers to it. And so I'll say, well, let's see what ChatGPT says.
Oh, I love it.
Basically, and then my kids are actually quite good about, well, school says we can't use the, ChatGPT on our work. So I'm like, okay, well, let's just use these ideas. We're not going to copy and paste this.
It's actually a really great lesson to teach kids too, right? Like idea generation, but then making it your own. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's exactly how you use it, of course. And I mean, it speaks to the same thing that the same theme, which is AI is not going to do everything for you. You still have to make the final decision. You still have to proof these things, these articles. It's not like you just cut and paste and send them over. But it does help with, organizing the ideas and generating new content or new ways of looking at things.
I was talking to a researcher and he was telling me about the use of ChatGPT to advance his particular area of research. And apparently in the process of doing the research, there's a constant number of hypotheses that are generated, reevaluated based on the next findings, going back and looking at what others have done, and then reformulating new hypotheses. Well, what ChatGPT does is it allows you to be able to do that far more efficiently and also generate hypotheses that you may not have even thought of.
You wouldn't have even thought, yeah.
And so this is
a lot,
extraordinary where we could potentially see this as accelerating the development and advancement of so many scientific discoveries.
Wow, that is incredible. What a fantastic way to close out our discussion today. Very inspirational. Thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules. This was just really, really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for this edition of Eye on Innovation. I'm Carrie Powers, your host. Subscribe on iTunes and subscribe on YouTube. We'll see you next time.